Hello, and welcome to Community Voices, where we talk to Humboldt County's movers and shakers. Today's guest, Amber Madrone, Development Director, CASA of Humboldt. And now here's your host, Paul Bressoud.
Hello and welcome to Access Humboldt's Community Voices. I'm your host, Paul Bressoud, and today we are speaking with Amber Madrone, the Development Director from CASA. Welcome, Amber, to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here today.
Right on. I always ask people first to kind of tell us what they do inside your organization, what the organization is about, and then kind of go with the questions from there. So, Development Director for CASA, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so CASA, at CASA, we link community member volunteers with children that are in foster care, and their role is to advocate for children in foster care, which is a very simplistic explanation, but I'm sure we'll get into more detail of that. But my role is to make sure that we have the resources to make this work happen. And so I always say that I kind of have the best role in the agency because when I really think about it, I'm in charge of all of the philanthropic work at our agency. And when you take the word philanthropy, it actually means doing good for the love of humanity. And there's no truer place than at CASA, where our volunteers are just amazing human beings that are doing good for our community. And our donors are also amazing individuals in our community that want to be part of the work that our advocates are doing. And so my role in our agency really is to connect the two. It's to connect the volunteers with the donors and to create that full circle of supporting our community.
When you say advocates, okay, this is the question I want to ask right off. You're talking about advocates to help represent someone in the juvenile court system, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So CASA actually stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, and all of our advocates are volunteers, and they go through a really specialized training to learn how to advocate for children and how to advocate within the court system. And then they're actually sworn in by the judge. And then after that swearing in process, that's when they're matched with a child in foster care, who they get to know and become an advocate for and actually help represent their best interest in the court system.
So let me ask this question first, kind of taking a step back. Why is there such a need to have advocates representing kids in the court systems?
Yeah. Well, if we take this kind of all the way back to when CASA the concept was developed in 1979, it was actually developed from a judge in Washington who was having sleepless nights because he said, in criminal cases and in civil cases, there's always difference of opinions, but you go through the process, you make your decision, and you feel like you've done the best you can. But he felt like in cases that involved children, he didn't feel like he was doing the best that he could. He felt like he was having to make these decisions with incomplete information, and that everybody sitting in that courtroom was making, they were making decisions that affected children for the rest of their lives, but nobody in that courtroom actually even knew this child or their families or their individual situation. And so he felt like there had to be a better way to really get to know these children before they made decisions that impacted their entire life. And so that's where this concept was developed of reaching out to the community, finding community members who could get to know these children, get to know their families, their school, their support systems, and find out what this child wanted and what this child needed, and then bring that back to the court so that the court could make well-informed decisions with information about this unique child.
Well, taking a step back again, just so I understand it, because I find this fascinating, the idea of the advocacy. What are the issues that are, in the forefront for kids that are going through courts where they would need advocates speaking for them?
Yeah, so if you look at just the process of being removed from your home, so first, a child has experienced abuse or neglect or some situation that has led them to the foster care system, and then they're removed from their homes. And just that act of being removed from your family and the people that you love and that you know, and being placed with a stranger, that in itself is traumatic. And then you look at the court process, and oftentimes a child, their social worker switches throughout the process. Oftentimes their attorney switches throughout the process. Their foster home can switch throughout the process. And during each of those transitions, information is lost. Oftentimes children have to switch schools, and their school, during that transition, their paperwork isn't transferred, or if they have special accommodations, those aren't transferred. They may have a doctor's appointment scheduled, and then during that transfer, that gets lost. And so there's so many opportunities where a child's needs kind of fall through the cracks during all of these different transitions, because there's nobody stable with them through this process. And so an advocate takes the time to get to know the child, and also to be consistent through this process, so that as these transitions happen, the child's needs aren't getting lost in these transitions.
So would an advocate's role in a court system be to go ahead and answer questions from a judge? There's no jury in a juvenile court system, correct? To answer questions from a judge and give a consistent background on the child who was in the court?
Correct. So an advocate gets to know the child, and the advocate also gets to know their natural support system. It is almost always in the child's best interest, if it is safe to do so, for a child to return to their family of origin. And so an advocate can get to know the family and see what resources may be needed to make that reunification happen in a healthy way, and they can help make those recommendations. If it is not safe for a child to return to that family, then an advocate is also looking at the broader support system. Is there extended family? Is there a friend that this child is connected to? Is there a foster family this child is connected to keep those connections intact, because that stability is so important for a child. And these are things that an attorney or a social worker may not even know, and they may be recommendations that they can't make because they don't know this individual child at the level that an advocate does. So
the actual court proceedings, are these primarily custody issues? These are not criminal issues, correct?
Well, typically a child is removed from their family of origin due to abuse or neglect. For whatever the reason is, it's not safe for the child to be in that home at that particular time. And so a child is removed from their home and placed in foster care. And then typically the family is given a reunification plan to try to do the steps to create an environment that is safe for the child to come back to. And so this court process kind of goes through evaluating that and deciding, is it safe for the child to return home, or is it not safe for the child to return home? So that's where these decisions really impact the child and their well-being for the rest of their life.
So as an advocate, I'm not doing any legal work, no lawyer done. I'm there to support and be a consistent voice for the kid through a period of time.
Correct. There are attorneys that do the legal stuff in court. Your job as an advocate really is to present the whole picture, all the information, and to speak up for what is in the child's best interest. You're getting to know the child. There's so many people in court. There's somebody representing the county. There's somebody representing the parents. But your role as an advocate is just to look at what is in the best interest of the child, to talk to the child, to find out what they want, to make sure that their voice is being heard in court, and that what they want is being looked at and heard from the judge.
A silly question, would you actually be speaking in court?
Typically you write a report. So the advocates go through, their training, but then they also have ongoing support from a case supervisor here at CASA. So There's support in writing the report. You know, our supervisors will help a CASA write the report because it can be intimidating in the beginning of, you know, what is this even? What is my role here? What am I supposed to do? But there's support all along the way on how to do that. And then we review the reports and submit them. And oftentimes CASAs go to court. If CASAs can't, then a supervisor will go to court, or a supervisor will go to court with an advocate. So advocates are never left on their own to figure this out or to navigate what their role is or what their responsibility is. There's always a supervisor there to support them through that process.
I must admit, that's always kind of when I've read about CASA, kind of the nervous, what do you mean I'm going to be support? Can you tell us about the training involved?
Yeah. So, you know, as with the rest of the world, during COVID, we have adjusted and reinvented. And so a lot of our training, some of it is through an online there's a national CASA, and so there's a lot of resources out there. So some of that is through that. Some of it is online Zoom trainings that we used to do in person, and now we do over the computer. And the great thing about that is it increases the accessibility. Whereas before, all of our trainings were held in our office in Eureka, now we're able to reach a broader selection of the counties. So people that maybe didn't feel like they could drive to Eureka from Southern Humboldt or, you know, Willow Creek, or can now do these trainings online and support children in their community, whereas before the distance was a little bit of the barrier. And the same thing with court. You know, court is now all online. So it really allows for us to reach more of the remote areas in our county. And it allows, where we used to do 4 trainings a year, now it really allows us, when an advocate is interested in starting, they can start at any time. We have ongoing trainings. You know, they start with an initial interview, and then they can get started right away with the trainings. So, you know, it's as with a lot of things, there's kind of been these unexpected blessings in this switch that COVID has created.
So as I'm going through, okay, so I'm signed up, I get the training, but there's a lot after that I think that an advocate would need support for. The court process, you mentioned the writing of the reports. The majority of the information sent to the judge is through report. Are there ongoing support systems for an advocate as they work with a child?
Absolutely. So each advocate has a supervisor that they're assigned to, and the supervisor does regular check-ins with them. The supervisor helps them with the court reports. The supervisor also, in between, you know, the court happens typically, you know, maybe once every 6 months. So in between that, there's so many other things that happen. So an advocate may be seeing that a child has educational needs that are not being met. And so there's school meetings, and the supervisor is helping an advocate. So an advocate may recognize an unmet need and then bring that back to the supervisor. And then the advocate and the supervisor together will look at, what is that unmet need? What are the resources? Who can we access to help meet that need? And then the supervisor works with the advocate to get those needs met. The advocate is never on their own to figure this out, because all of the issues are complex, and so there's always support in how to best meet the needs of the children.
Does the advocate have access to all the child's information during that time, which they are the advocate?
So the advocate has access to all the information that they need to be able to see the full picture. The advocate does have access to information from the social worker. You know, the goal of the advocate is to meet with and learn from as many people in the child's life as possible, so that they have a really clear picture of how to best meet the needs for the child.
Okay.
And there's also there's ongoing training. So you do your initial training, and then advocates have to do minimum number of hours of ongoing training throughout the year too. So there's always ongoing training, and there's always individual support for the advocates.
Would an advocate have to have legal experience?
Absolutely not. So our goal, as we reach out for advocates, we really want a cross-section of our community. The children that we are working with are members of our community. They're in all areas of our community. And so for our advocates, we just want a diverse representation of our community. There's no educational requirements, there's no legal requirements. The requirements are that obviously there's, the background check that needs to happen. You have to be 21 years old, and you have to be willing to make a 2-year commitment, because the goal of an advocate is that they remain stable for a child. So we don't want advocates coming in and out of a child's life. And you have to be willing to commit a couple hours a week to the child. And above and beyond that, the training and support you need to feel confident going into this role, we support you with that.
The couple hours a week that you're asking for, if not in court, what might that look like for an advocate?
So most of that looks like spending time with the child. It's taking the child out, it's spending time with them, it's doing things with them, it's finding out what their interests are and meeting them where they are. It could be taking them to grab a bite to eat, going for a walk, helping them explore an interest that they have that, maybe nobody else has helped them explore that interest. It's really spending time with them to develop a trusting relationship with them, so that they know that there is a stable adult in their life that they can count on and that they can talk to. And throughout that process, you're able to help make recommendations on what's best for the child, because you get to know the child.
And advocates, we should say, advocates are accountable to be mandated reporters, correct?
Yes. Yes. So it is important, as that relationship is developed, we always tell the child and the birth parents and the foster parents and all the adults in that child's life, they are mandated reporters, and they do make reports to the court. So we want to make sure that all of that is out in the open in the beginning, so there's not surprises with those two aspects.
If I can switch gears a little bit and ask about CASA, the organization. You said it started up in Seattle, Washington. Is it now a nationwide organization, or is this a West Coast phenomenon?
It is nationwide. So there's a National Association of CASAs, which we are a part of. And then there's a California Association of CASAs, which we are also a part of. So we are our own individual nonprofit, but we are part of these two associations, which have standards, standard level of care that we meet, and provide amazing resources for all the individual CASAs.
Do they also go ahead and do you connect on national levels? I guess not during COVID, maybe, but did you used to have? Are there CASA conventions? Are there get-togethers and trainings and those kind of things?
Yeah, there are CASA conventions. There are lots of ongoing trainings, and there's also lots of peer support. So there's different, there's a group for supervisors, there's a group for executive directors, there's a group for development directors, where other CASAs in your same role can get together and use each other's resources and support. You can bring stuff, to a team of other like-minded professionals that you can talk things out with. And there's lots of ongoing training opportunities as well. And so to be able to access those resources at that higher level and bring them down to a local level is really amazing.
How long has CASA been in Humboldt County?
CASA has been in Humboldt County since 1991.
And is this looked upon as a strong chapter?
Yeah, this, our CASA, I've actually only been at CASA since September, but it is, just an amazing organization that is doing really concrete work to change the future of our community and to provide a level playing field for our youngest members.
Are you always on the hunt, so to speak, for advocates?
Yes, there are definitely more kids in foster care than we currently have advocates for. And one of our goals is to continue to increase our ability to meet the need of the children in our community. And so we are always on the hunt for advocates. And we are also always looking for donors who want to be part of, but don't have the time commitment. It is such a concrete way to give and know that you're having an impact on the children in our community, your neighbors, your children's friends and classmates. This is our community. We're all in this together. And so whether people have time to commit to being an advocate or whether people have, money that they can give, both of those together complete the circle of being able to support the kids in our community.
Is it harder to get advocates during times like these, the pandemic?
Yeah, it's really shifted some. And, there was definitely this lull of people pulling back from volunteering and doing in person. And at the same time, this greater need because children who may have found stability at school or who had other adults that were in their lives looking out for them, all of a sudden now don't have that and they're at home and all of those connections have been severed. And so the need for advocacy has become even greater. And so I'm really pleased, that we do still have advocates coming in and we do still have our ongoing trainings. And there was definitely kind of that a little bit of a pullback and a little bit of shift and a little bit of how is this going to work? But we're now kind of back in a place of going on strong.
The pandemic's been tough. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic must have been the toughest on people that were in, situations that might not have been so good. Yeah. Has there been a greater need for advocates because there's more kids in a system that, need a transition or different custody than ever before? I mean, is this a phenomenon that's happened because of the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of times, an initial report is made by a teacher or by somebody that sees the child outside of the home. So there's been that kind of removal of that safety net while children were at home and not in schools and not in daycares and not in being seen in person at places where the original reports were often made. And at the same time, the need has increased because children have been so isolated and haven't been able to access other forms of support.
Is that creating some sort of crisis, so to speak, as people are kind of, I would assume you think we're reemerging? I kind of do as we're shifting back. Has that created, are there a lot of people out there, young children in peril?
There are, and there's a lot of need, and there are a lot of children that currently don't have CASAs that would greatly benefit from a CASA. The one thing about childhood trauma that we have, has been studied and we have learned is that the impacts of childhood trauma last a lifetime, for mental health and physical health and education and well-being. But so many of those effects can be reversed if a child has a consistent, caring, stable adult in their life. And so having a CASA at this point in their lives can actually change the trajectory of their entire life. It can change the path of their life into adulthood. So when you're looking for an impactful way to volunteer, it's pretty amazing to think about the impact that a volunteer can have in our community on a child in our community.
You mentioned earlier about a greater need for advocates than in most times. How are you reaching out to the community to find advocates?
Our advocates are amazing and they are one of our best resources. So I think that oftentimes when somebody gets connected with CASA and they see the impact and they see the personal reward, a lot of our advocates come through word of mouth. A lot of our advocates, knew somebody that was an advocate that said, talked about their experience as an advocate. So that is a huge way that we get advocates. We also, we have, airtime on our local radios. We have all of our social media. We attend virtual events. We have amazing board members that really anybody that is connected with CASA, they are our best voices because they have actual experiences and they go out and talk about what it's meant for them. So we really try and reach out in all the different areas and ways that we can. And that, again, has shifted to a lot of different virtual things with the pandemic, to let people know that the need is here, the support is here, and the impact that they can have here in our community.
Kind of a wrap up, a final question. As you build these community links, you're always out looking for advocates. What about fundraising within a community and getting community support? I would assume that a lot of your time is spent doing that as well. Absolutely.
And, again, a lot of times, we in the past have had an annual event in the springtime, and during the pandemic, we haven't been able to have the same event that we've had before. But the need is still just as great. And so we're shifting our fundraising efforts, and a lot of our fundraising efforts right now are really reaching out and talking to our donors and to our community members and letting them know that, even though during the pandemic we're not able to have, an event and come and meet in person, the need is just as great and the money goes just as directly to our children. And that, giving right now has a direct impact on our community and the kids in our community. And so it's connecting with donors on an individual basis and letting them know where their dollars are going versus having in-person events that are harder to have, harder and impossible to have during a pandemic. So it's definitely a shift in those traditional fundraising efforts that I think all nonprofits are going through right now.
So you said you've been on it since September. You enjoying it?
I love it.
Good.
I have a very personal connection with CASA, and it's very close to my heart. And it's an amazing agency to be with.
Well, you were a great guest. Thank you very much for coming on. That's about all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank Amber Madrone for being here. She is the Development Director of CASA. So thank you. And for Community Voices, Paul Bressoud saying goodbye.
This has been Community Voices with your host, Paul Bressoud. If you represent a nonprofit organization and are interested in being a guest on Community Voices, send an email to info@accesshumboldt.net or call 476-1798. Access Humboldt. Local voices through community media.